What's going on, folks? Ted from Immersion here, and as promised, I'm going to go through what was said at the 2024 Rules Revision panel that I attended Friday morning at GenCon 2023. I did live tweet the entire thing, which is great because that means I have physical references and things to go back and look at and show you on screen as we continue to make our journey through what was said in that panel, and then I can expand on things further based on what I remember from attending. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and jump in. So here it is. This is the first tweet here. Talking about the journey so far for the 2024 revisions, articles 1 through 5 or experimentation phases. So that's what we received in Unearthed Arcanas 1 through 5. Experimentation, trying new things, trying to see what, that's why we saw things that were so different, like the various critical hit, critical miss rules, right? First, there was the monsters can't crit. Then there was you get inspiration if you roll a 1. Then there was inspiration if you roll a 20 and all this other kind of stuff. That was the experimental phase of trying different things in the hopes that maybe we'd find a hidden gem in there, coming up with different stuff. Maybe, one of these things would really resonate with everybody. And then, we'd have some sort of dark horse that is the winner, right? And then it says with the Unearthed Arcana 6+, they're revising the 2024 rules. So that's kind of what we've seen. So 6 through 9 are all going to be refining things that were contained in the 2014 Player's Handbook. Then with Articles 10+, that's going to be all about the Dungeon Master Guide and the Monster Manual, which is things we have not touched yet. So, in the process of trying to find things that are missing from the 2014 handbooks, the Weapon Mastery subsystem came from this. It has also been confirmed by Chris and Jeremy in this panel that Weapon Mastery will 100% appear in the 2024 books. It has been so heavily approved and, everyone seems to really appreciate it and like that system. So Weapon Mastery is absolutely moving forward. Look for a version of that. Well, it might be slightly tweaked or different than what we see, and it may be refined in future Unearthed Arcanas. The finalized, a version of it will appear in 2024. So over 500,000 people have downloaded the Unearthed Arcana articles so far, which is a record-breaking number for WotC. Okay, a notepad was handed to all of the tables for people to write down questions they had for the end of the panel Q&A, which they did reserve time at this point for Q&A. I'm noticing, having attended the Content Creator Summit, where people just barrage them with questions that they were not prepared for. The concept of everybody writing down their questions and then gathering those questions up and then reading them meant that if there were questions that were really out of pocket or things that they didn't need to answer or couldn't answer or would just, be a bad look, as it were, those questions just wouldn't be read. We didn't know how much time we'd have. We also were late to this panel because the panel was supposed to be in the convention center and they moved it all the way across the street to Union Station. So basically, we were all standing outside of the convention room 145, ready to go, and then we all had to basically pick up and walk all the way out of the convention center, across the street, 2 blocks to get into where the panel was actually being held. So they had decided they were going to go a little bit longer, but also try to leave some room for Q&A. Then we have this one here about the Unearthed Arcana goals, right? Introduce new rules, which is what we talked about with Articles 1 through 5. Optimize the best elements, which is what we're seeing in 6 through 9. And then turn the unsatisfactory into satisfactory. And this is the first time we see this data here, which is showing what they did a mass survey back in 2021, talking about the Player's Handbook, what you like, what you didn't like. And these were the approval ratings in 2021 versus the approval ratings we see in 2023. So you see the Berserker subclass for the Barbarian had a 29% approval rating. It has now been bumped to 84. The Champion, 54, now to 74. The Ranger as a whole for its class, 27, is now at 83. The Hunter subclass was at 64 and is now at 71. And the Sorcerer class as a whole was at 60 and is now at 72. I still feel like, and I said it right here, the 2023 numbers for the Ranger seem a little high to me. 83% seems a little high. I still feel like it's still missing its core identity, but either way. And again, the main goal of Unearthed Arcana is to turn unsatisfactory into satisfactory. And Jeremy reiterates that the metric is 70% that doesn't need massive changes. So if any of these in 2023 came back with an under 70%, they know they have to take a really hard look at it and possibly rework a lot of the mechanics. Anything that's here that's been voted over 70% means that it's good enough, but it might need some tweaks. Looking at use hunter, sorcerer, or hunter subclass and sorcerer, you are at 71 and 72% respectively, which means even though you got changes in the Unearthed Arcana, you are only just barely coming in above their minimum approval, to move forward. So if I were WotC, I would look pretty closely at these because they are just barely approved, at least with your own internal metrics, which means people didn't really love them that much, which means there might be some more tweaking to be done. All right, then it goes on to Character Options Reborn, the new Weapon Mastery system, which we know what that is, the new background system, new subclasses, feats, and spells, optimized classes, spells, and more, and new art and organization and reference. It says they played with the Weapon Mastery feature a lot internally, and everybody seemed to love it, so they released it to playtest. And again, they reiterated because everybody received the Weapon Mastery feats or subsystem so well, it made it into the 2024 books. And then again, they did say there may still be some refinement of the Weapon Mastery subsystem in the coming months. With the next couple Unearthed Arcanas, they may make tweaks to the way things are done. Perhaps the number of weapon masteries that different classes have access to. Perhaps the exact wording of different features may be changed. Maybe, for example, we'll get Graze. The Graze feature will be able to be affected by rage damage, perhaps, would be really cool. The new background system will also be moving forward to the 2024 rulebooks. So again, that's the concept of how new backgrounds are designed, but that you also get a feat from your background rather than just like an inborn background feature. And they said if the overall feedback for an option or feature is we like the 2014 version better, they'll leave that alone and print it. So if there's something that they experimented with or tried to change something up, and like let's say that they changed one of the features of the War Domain Cleric, let's say. And the overwhelming feedback is leave the level 2 feature alone or level 3 feature alone. Everybody, says that they like the 2014 version better than what you presented. Then they'll just use what 2014 had instead and print that. Possibly with little tweakings to the word to make it fit into the updated rules landscape that they've made. But more or less, they're going to leave anything that's largely loved in its original version, leave that alone. They also said there will be art for each class and subclass. So when it has, however many, 6 different, let's say, cleric domains, you'll have art for the base cleric and then art for each of the subclasses. So that's really cool, iconic art for each of them. There'll be more guidance in the player's handbook for building a character, as well as an expanded rules glossary and an index. They've once again confirmed that it will work with all 2014 adventures, settings, etc. Another thing that I wanted to point out with the Weapon Mastery system is they didn't know how we were going to receive it. They really liked it a lot, and they play tested it internally, and then that's why they released it to us, the public, in the Unearthed Arcana. But if our overwhelming feedback on Weapon Mastery was negative, they would have cut it and come up with something else. So, again, take it with a grain of salt. This is what they're saying in the panel, knowing something that was received well and is going to move forward. They could just say that and could have done it anyway, but, you have to consider what you think, right? You never know. We've seen a lot of back and forth and kind of double talk at various areas, but I think as a general rule, everybody does like the Weapon Mastery system, so we will see it move forward. I really couldn't see an area where the large majority of people would have shot that system down. But again, if what they say is true, if we did all hate Weapon Mastery as it stands, in theory, they're not going to add it to the system when it comes out in 2024. Okay. We know that James Wyatt is going to be co-leading the 2024 Dungeon Master Guide revision with Chris Perkins. So it's not just Chris alone working on that. James is working on it as well. I like James Wyatt a lot. He's done fantastic work. For those of you who don't know, he worked on Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. He also, I think, was the original pen and author of the 3.5 Draconomicon, which is enough of a tenure and enough of, you get my seal of approval for making that book in and of itself, because it's fantastic. So here's a little bit about the DM's guide, retooled or reforged. new how-tos on running the game, ready-to-use campaign setting, new bastion system, new encounter building rules, and new map art and organization. Again, this is retreading some stuff we heard at the Content Creator Summit, but the GMG will be more of a how-to guide, more accessible to new DMs, but also have tips and tools for all DMs. And again, confirming that it will be more show, less tell. There's a campaign model in the Dungeon Master's Guide, so that's something that Chris brought up at the summit, and he also brought it up here, that, you know, they only talk in kind of in a high level about what it is to build a campaign. So they actually have how to build a campaign and then show you one in the book on how to build it. There will also be a campaign setting poster map in the back of the DMG as well. So you can actually just run the campaign that's written in the DMG or take parts of it or use it as a general model on how to build your own campaign. And that's nice because I always have felt that the DMG was lacking good actual Dungeon Master tools. And it sounds like they're really going that way with the 2024 version. There'll be all new content like the Bastion system, which are basically player strongholds. These are designed to work with 5e and will allow, that means backwards compatible as well, will allow players to build a home base / safe space. As the players become more powerful, you can upgrade and improve your Bastion. Some upgrades are cosmetic, while some are facilities that allow you to do things while adventuring. This can come with in-game benefits like starting a guild, building a ship or an airship or what have you, recruiting soldiers. So basically, I'll get to it in a second, but anything that you would do in downtime, your Bastion, in theory, if you have the right resources and facilities built, can do that for you. So for those of you who ever looked at the downtime rules, I have a couple videos here on the channel about it if you're curious, if you don't want to go look it up yourself. They're basically what your players do in their downtime. The problem is, typically, when you get together to play a game of D&D, you want to get together and play D&D. You don't want to play not doing anything by having downtime. And the Bastion system is kind of an avenue for that. You can still be out actively adventuring and doing stuff, and then, people at your Bastion can be doing the downtime activities for you. It said it'll be rolled out in an Unearthed Arcana either the end of this year or early next year, so we'll get a playtest version of the Bastion system. They also mentioned that this could be like a stronghold, a wizard tower, a cleric-style sanctuary. It does look like there'll be custom options to fit basically your character, and they'll help facilitate your ability to use downtime activities. An example given was, downtime has rules for wanting to buy or sell a magic item, and it takes time while you look for somebody to find the magic item for you to buy it, or possibly for somebody to fence the item that you have so you can get some money for it. And instead of you having to sit around and do downtime, you could go to your stronghold, your Bastion, talk to your guy who works there and lives in your stronghold and say, hey, I need you to go sell this magic item for me. And then you can go back out on the road adventuring, and whenever you come back home, he could tell you, hey, here it is. Did I get a good price for it? That's actually something Jeremy, basically that exact example is, hey, can you sell this magic item for me? And then you go out questing. Eventually you make your way back and you say, hey, how did it go? Did you sell it? Well, how much money did we get for it? And then the DM uses the downtime rules in the background while they're continuing to go on an active adventure to figure out the answer to that question of how much money they got. New encounter building rules will build on what was released in the updates in Xanathar's Guide. They're going to have ready-to-use maps for all occasions in the DMG. So this is like, here's a ready-to-go forest map, a dungeon map, a city map, stuff that you can just pull, drop, and use in your game, as opposed to having to build them all yourself or use pre-existing adventures. There'll also be a series of handouts, which will be available digitally to help the DM build settlements, distribute magic items, which is great. It doesn't really seem like they're improving the DMG to actually give you tools that Dungeon Masters need. We have some new art here. This looks like this might be a silver dragon, possibly. The art looks great, but it was very muted because it was on a projector screen, and I'm taking a picture of that projector screen. There will be font size increases in the books. Turns out that the core rule books actually have smaller, the 2014 ones have smaller font than any other D&D 5e book. More spells will be illustrated in the PHB. There's only 3 or 4 spells in the entirety of the player's handbook that have illustrations of how the magic looks. There will be more of that. We'll also have more art of the iconic wizards, and by that I mean Tasha, Bigby, Tensor, Mordenkainen, and so on. More art of them, as well as more named spells like that, Mordenkainen's blah, 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 Tasha's hideous laughter, things like that. More spells like that. There'll also be more arts of villains in the Dungeon Master's Guide. They used Baba Yaga and Venger from the D&D cartoon as examples of villain art that will be in the DMG. Jeremy is co-leading the Monster Manual rewrite with Wes Snyder. There will be over 500 monsters in this book. New high CR monsters, new NPC groups, monsters optimized for fun and challenge, new art, organization, and reference. So they reiterated that there will be more CR 20 plus monsters for more monster types. Again, meaning that there are a lot of CR 20 fiends, dragons, and so on. But they gave an example of a CR 20 plus ooze, and its playtest name is the Blob of Annihilation. It's so big that it could dissolve an entire town. It could even dissolve the Tarask. They mentioned an elemental juggernaut and a CR20 plus hag as well. I couldn't remember. They actually gave us the name of the hag. I don't know if it was like Elder Hag or something, but I can't remember the official name. There's also, they said, creating a lich family similar to dragons. So what they mean by that is that for a dragon, you have wormling, young, adult, ancient, and so on. Different tiers of dragon ages means you can have different dragons that you can fight at various CRs. So they're going to be doing the same thing with liches, because this gives the opportunity for a DM who wants to throw a lich at the party, but it's only a low-level campaign and it'll never get to the point where you can fight a full CR lich, that they'll have lesser ones. They gave an example of basically the wizard died today and became the lich. So they're not super powerful, so they might be a lower CR. So same thing with vampire. They mentioned a vampire familiar, which will be lower than a vampire spawn in power, as well as a vampire lord that will be higher than a traditional vampire. So you have different levels of that, and we'll be seeing more of that. The same thing is going to be true for NPCs. More NPCs of various challenge ratings, as well as new NPC types. They used Performer as an example of NPC type. Returning monsters will be optimized and updated, so a monster you fought before might be different or have new skills. They kept saying they wanted to add spice, make the monsters more spicy. So they want to make more bland monsters more spicy. And they said if there's an existing monster with a lot of spice, they won't remove it, but they want to make it more optimized. So basically, they want to have less walls of text. Our monster has an ability that's a big, thick chunk of text. Very easy to bog the game down as you're trying to read it. So that will be more streamlined. And they also said one of the worst things that can happen as a DM is you go through and do an attack or an ability for a monster to only fully read it on the next turn and realize, oh crap, this monster also did this other cool thing that I didn't realize. So this would have changed the whole course of the combat. And they're trying to streamline those monster stat blocks to not have that happen anymore. An example they kind of gave was that a hill giant, rather than just hitting you with a club or a rock, it will be able to knock you back really far. Something simple, but it added more flavor and more spice to an ability that a hill giant might have. Again, we've seen this art before, but this is the new Black Dragon art. The monsters will be, again, they mentioned this at the summit, but the monsters will be alphabetized. So gelatinous cube won't be under O for ooze, it'll be under G for gelatinous cube, just like ochre jelly will be under O. They won't be grouping things like all the fiends under D for demon or D for devil. Erinyes will be under E, barbed devil will be under B. Things that make it a little more intuitive to find the monsters. All right, then we got this other art here, and then we moved on to the Q&A section. Can we expect more support for the exploration pillar? The goal is to bring forward what's currently in the DMG and expand on it to bring that and give that more opportunity. They want to add more tools, but they don't want to overcomplicate the game and bog it down. This was interesting because they said written a new wilderness survival approach, and a couple of other things they said, and they were so crunchy and so mechanically driven. They said it's very easy for them to add a ton of mechanics to just add more rules and things for you to do in the game. But the problem is when you have so many mechanics and it's so crunchy, it actually slows the game down immensely because, you're trying to travel one hex on a hex map and you have to do all these different rules. It really bogs things down. So the goal is to add tools and add value where possible, but not overcomplicate things that makes the game slug along so that, people get bored and lose interest. They said we're going to see more things like the influence action, which was added in the Unearthed Arcana. And again, they're having this new kind of updated version of the wilderness survival rules That discussion is going to happen after Gen Con. Yeah, here's the mechanically heavy exploration system, but they cut it. Question about compatibility on the player side of things. Yes, it will work with things like Xanathar's or Tasha's. You will not need an external compatibility guide. It's explained in the 2024 books. The only thing they said is if you're playing a 2014 class, you'll have to use a 2014 subclass. Meaning that if you're playing a 2014 class, you couldn't use a 2024 subclass. But if you were playing a 2024 class, you could use a 2014 subclass. If they're that way, I don't understand why they couldn't all be interchangeable, but there must have been a reason why, otherwise they wouldn't have mentioned it. What about compatibility with an OGL SRD in Creative Commons? Will the 2024 rules be added? Kyle Brink was in the room. He confirmed, yes, there will be, these rules will be added. Updates will be made to the SRD accordingly to fit where necessary to allow these updated, rules for 2024 to be free and available for everybody to use. What's your favorite thing that they both asked, what's your favorite thing that you've play tested in the 2024 Unearthed Arcana? Chris and Jeremy both agreed. Weapon mastery system. Again, they said there will be adjustments to spells to balance them, similar to what we've seen in Unearthed Arcana. The spell will be adjusted to fit their level, maybe more damage, maybe it goes to a bonus action from an action. But then they also said some spells may be adjusted in other ways to rein them in. So if there's a spell that's really, they called it disruptive, in that like the spell itself does so much or is so controversial that it basically stops the game while the discussions are had. So an example they brought up is like maybe a spell that's super powerful and is like an obvious choice that wasn't concentration before. It will become concentration now to kind of rein things back in. Again, we also mentioned there will be more named wizard spells. Someone brought up a kingdom building question. Could the Bastion system be expanded to include kingdom building? And Chris said it's designed to be expandable, but not designed to build a kingdom. And the concept he said was when you're at the point where you're basically building a kingdom, he feels like the game of Dungeons and Dragons at that point is changed significantly when you're building a kingdom versus when you're just out adventuring, and that's not really what D&D is designed to become, like a resource management sim, Civ style game. So again, if that's something people really want, they'll look to do that. And then they say we might see more Bastion expansions in the future, which means like other books might have improved options for Bastions. Somebody said, can we get more flavor, more weapon options and more flavor? And Jeremy did say there will be some new weapon options. Wow, I scrolled up to the top. My bad. There will be new weapon options in the player's handbook that we get in 2024. Let me find where I was. Okay. Yes, there will be new weapons in the 2024 PHB. We might see more weapons in future books. So, like, we're going to get some new options in the player's handbook and then future, which is also good to hear that they're not opposed to this concept, because I thought they were, with the fact that we haven't really received much in the way of new weapons, with the exception of like the double scimitar from Eberron. So we might see some new weapons, or supposed to see new weapons in the new PHB, and then we might see new weapons in future books. The weapon mastery system also makes these weapons, and that's another reason why they added weapon mastery, because they might come up with a cool new weapon type that they add to the 2024 player's handbook, and that allows them to create and develop a new weapon master new weapon mastery option for that weapon specifically. They also said we might see other weapon masteries in the future. So you might see other options potentially swappable with existing weapons. Maybe it'll be like the dagger can use Nick or one of these new options or something like that. And then again, the fighter would still have the ability to switch things around, which is nice to see that they're not thinking that the weapon mastery system is just done. They're also looking to expand that as well. What's your favorite setting to play in or /DM in? They both said Planescape, and then Chris said, I also like donuts. Someone said, if you grapple a gelatinous cube, do you take damage? And Chris said, not if you use tongs. And then Jeremy said, use tongs. Jeremy once again confirmed that the feedback is being taken into account. 3 members of their team are dedicated to read through the comments and Unearthed Arcana feedback. And that was it. That was the panel. The only other thing that I didn't mention in here was somebody asked a question about feats. And what I thought was really interesting was they said when they were originally designing the 2014 Player's Handbook, the intent was that all feats, because we see now that some feats have a prerequisite of being 4th level, and, everything else isn't, and those are the ones that can be taken for backgrounds. But what I thought was interesting was that in 2014, they had basically designed the feats to all be able to work at level 4, because that was really the only way you could get access to a feat would be when you hit level 4, you could take an ability score improvement or a feat. So most of the 2014 feats were balanced around the concept that you would have to be at least level 4 to get it. But then they added Variant Human to the game, which added you to the ability to get a feat at level 1. And they never went back and changed anything. So that's why, some feats are very strong, a lot stronger than others, and can be almost broken to some extent if a level 1 human character has that feat right out the get-go. But that being said, it was interesting to just hear that design aspect. And that is the entirety of the 2024 Rules Revision panel, gone through by me as live tweeted by me. So hopefully this helps you get an understanding of what we all saw when we were there. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.